Okay, we are going to talk about using suffixes today. We're going to talk about a rule we have with using these suffixes of es, ed, er, and est. A suffix is when we put an ending on a base word. So I've written some base words over here, and I want to talk about what's special about these base words before we put our endings of es, ed, er, and est on them. And there's a rule for when we're writing them. So our rule for some of these, when we add an es, ed, er, est ending, is that if you noticed, all of these words end with a y, right? So our rule is when we write and we have to add our ending, our suffix, which is our ending, to the base word, we have to change the letter y to an I and then add our ending. So each one of these words ends with a y. And if you remember, we talked about the sounds of Y earlier in first grade, and we said Y sometimes can make the sound of long I, and sometimes it can make the sound of long E. In our first word, dry, the Y makes the long I sound. So if we're going to add our ending and we're going to follow the rule for Y changes to I, then I'm going to spell it with a DR, and I'm going to change that Y to an I and then add ES to make the word dries. Sam dries her clothes in the sun. So that would be a way to spell the word dries. We change that Y to an I. If we wanted to spell the word dried and we wanted to say she dried her clothes yesterday, we would change that Y to an I and then add ED. Whoops, what's happening here? So, I'm losing my empty. So, my next word I wanted to work on was the word empty. So, again, with the word empty, it makes the long E sound. Our Y has the long E sound for empty. But I'm going to change that Y to an I, and I'm going to add ES to make empties, to say something that is happening right now, we would say empties. She empties her school bag when she arrived to school. If we wanted to say that we have emptied something that already happened, we would say it was EMPTIED to show that it is something that already happened, and we would add our ED after we changed it, the Y to an I. Same thing for the word cry. We wanted to say something that's happening now. We want to add the ending ES. The baby cries at night. We're showing us something that's happening. So to spell cries, I'm changing the Y to an I, and then I'm adding ES. The same thing when I wanted to change it to cry. The baby cried last night. It's something that's already happened. We changed the Y to an I, and then I added ED. I don't know why my thing keeps making a space here. I want to fix that so this way we're okay. I don't have all these spaces, but let's do the next one. Worry. For the word worry, this Y word makes the long E sound at the end. Even though it makes that long E sound, it's still a Y. So to make it worries, I have to change that Y to an I before I can add ES. To do worried, something that's already taken place, I again have to change that Y, to an I, and then add our ending ED. So for all of these words right here, here's our base words. And before I put their endings, I made sure because they ended with a Y, I changed them all to an I. And I did that for our ES, something that's happening now or something that's going on, is adding ES. ED, remember, it was something that happened in the past, we add ED. So I also want to talk about for our ER and our EST endings. If you remember from probably about a month ago, we were comparing words with ER and EST, and we talked about the word smaller and smallest. And we would have said that if you wanted to compare one thing to something else, you added ER. If you compared many things, you added EST. So I might have said the book is smaller than the desk. I'm comparing the book, the desk. If I wanted to use the word smallest, I might say this book is the smallest book on the shelf. I'm comparing it to many books. So we can still compare with these words, silly, funny, crazy, which are our adjectives. They're words that describe something, and we can compare them and add ER and EST. But because these words end with a Y, we change that Y to an I, so we have sillier. When we compare one thing to something else, we say sillier. When we compare many things, we can say silliest, and we change that Y to an I. I could do the same thing with the word funny. I can take the word funny and I can change that Y to an I and add the ER ending. Oops. And then I can take that and I can change the word to funniest, and I can change the Y to an I and add the EST. I can take the same word crazy, which is another adjective word is describing something, but because it ends with a Y, I have to add an I, change that Y. I'm not adding, I'm actually changing the Y to an I, and then I'm going to add ER, crazier. If I wanted to say craziest, I'm going to spell the word crazy, but I'm not going to put the Y, I'm going to change it to an I, and then I'm going to add the EST. So the rule that we need to remember whenever we add our endings with ES or an ending with ED, something that's happened already, something happening now, or we're comparing with ER or EST, if a word ends with Y, we have to remember to change the Y to an I. So I'm going to leave you with that, and I'm going to ask that you then do page 429 in your big blue book so that you can practice adding endings to words where you're changing a spelling of a word with a Y to an I. Thanks so much for listening.